Well, there were a million different things I needed to do. It was my last week in seminary, and I was approaching the end of my time there. I was preparing for ordination, and I was planning for the ordination ceremony, which is a bit like planning for a wedding, right? There's kind of venues to book and centerpieces to choose. There's entertainment to line up, meal choices to make, rehearsals to run, responsibilities to assign, arguments to be had. There's numbers to confirm, just like at a wedding. There's all those people you have to invite, but you hope they don't show up. The same kind of deal. On top of that, I was working out the logistical details for my post-ordination vacation, kind of like my honeymoon, but without the honey, Now, on that particular day was the day of the dreaded STB exam, which was the final comprehensive exam of my whole time at seminary, and it consisted of a very anxious and insecure would-be priest standing in front of a panel of the world's foremost experts on every theological topic imaginable, and said seminarian would stand there as this panel would hurl question after question on any topic and every topic for the next 45 minutes without taking a breath. Now, I was stressed that day. And you might say I was worried and distracted by many things as I stood before this panel of people. That morning, I decided I was too busy to pray. Have you ever been too busy to pray? Don't raise your hand, that's a rhetorical question. I was too busy to pray, so I didn't. I stepped into that exam. I used my morning prayer time to instead study and prepare myself, and then I proceeded with the exam, and I did all right, I emerged a little bruised and battered, but none the worse for wear. But there was one question I did not answer and I could not answer, and I just stood there and fumbled before this panel. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that question a little bit later on, but I want to stick with this idea of being too busy to pray, because I often feel that way, and I'm sure some of you do too. Whether that's because you have small children running around everywhere, diapers to change, Lego landmines to avoid on the bedroom floor. Maybe you're trying to harmonize everyone's schedules, getting everyone to their practice on time, music practice, soccer practice, make sure everyone's getting to their appointments. Perhaps it's cooking, cleaning, making sure the house is in order. It's the juggling all the various expectations of being a student in the modern world. Perhaps at work, you're faced with the impossibility of deadlines to meet and a to-do list as long as your arm. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but a couple months ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with all the things I had to do. And so the fruitless attempt to get back to sleep, I finally got out of bed, and I just started writing down all the things that came into my head that I had to do, and I ended up writing down a list of over 30 things. It's like no wonder I couldn't sleep. I was distracted and worried by many things. We're just so busy. The 21st century chaotic, frenetic pace of life that we're expected to live with all of its responsibilities and expectations, we often feel too busy to pray. Now, Martha knows what that feels like. We heard about her in the gospel today. She was worried and distracted by many things, and you would too if you were having Jesus over to your house for dinner with an untold number of people in tow, right? You don't know how many people are going to show up, so they get to work, cleaning and shopping and vacuuming and dusting and, shoving the dirty clothes from the floor into the closet, hoping nobody will see those. If you're a married man, if you're a married woman, you give a list, right? If you're a married man, you get a list, right? That's how it worked in my house growing up. My dad would get a list, and on it would be all these things that had nothing to do with actually getting the house ready for visitors, but had been neglected for a long time, right? Now, Jesus shows up at their house bringing a whole crew with him, and Mary and Martha quickly gets about doing all the things that need to be done, that are consistent with the expectations, responsibilities, Middle Eastern hospitality of her time. Now, as she's doing all the things, she notices that Mary has gone missing. How convenient, right? Reminds me of growing up, my brother used to conveniently disappear right after dinner, post-dinner cleanup, into the bathroom for like 20 minutes. Without fail. No, I'm not talking about the time Father Simon had a shamrock shake and found out he was lactose intolerant. So Martha, she goes looking for Mary, and she finds her sitting at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. Martha is running around like a chicken with her head cut off, trying to do all the things, and there's her sister Mary just sitting there at the feet of Jesus. How dare she? And so she turns to Jesus and she says, Jesus, tell Mary to get off her lazy hindquarters. That's my translation. And help me in the kitchen. And Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. You are worried and distracted by many things. And I don't know about you, but I often feel just that way. Jesus says, there is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. See, before everything else needed to be done, the cooking, the cleaning, the vacuuming, the preparation, the attending to the guests, there was one fundamental priority. And that's this: just to sit and listen at the feet of Jesus. See, that's a disciple's priority before everything else. That's the better part that Jesus is referring to sit and listen at his feet. Now, that can be hard when we feel that the intense pressure of all the crushing responsibilities and expectations, cultural expectations, family expectations, work expectations, school expectations. There's a million things vying for our attention. Look at me, pick me up, do this, do that. And I often find, ask myself, who's got time to pray? I'm too busy to pray, Lord. I'm too busy doing your work. Too busy to pray. But the reality is that the remedy for a crazy, busy, out of control, frenetic pace of life is to sit and listen to God in silence. See, the truth is, God has given us exactly enough time in a day to do all the things that he has called us to do, but we will not know what those things are if we don't sit and listen to him. If we don't ask him, if we don't help him, ask him to help us prioritize our lives. A spiritual author and Catholic saint, Francis de Sales, once said, "Half an hour's meditation each day is essential, except when you're too busy. Then you need a whole hour." The truth is, the busier we are, the more time for prayer we need. The reality is, I'm too busy not to pray. I need it. And I think the challenge that Jesus is issuing to us today is to be a little bit more like Mary and just a little bit less like Martha. To prioritize prayer above everything else and before everything else. But not just any kind of prayer where we might just say a few things to God on our way to work, in the car, while we're cleaning the house, doing the vacuuming, whatever. Talking about the kind of prayer where we sit and listen in silence. We're not talking, we're not doing, we're just being in the presence of God. We're talking about a type of prayer in the Catholic tradition we call contemplative prayer. Cultivating this silent awareness of God's presence as he speaks to us heart to heart. One of the great mystics of the church, John of the Cross, he said, "Our greatest need is to be silent before this great God. For the only language he hears is the silent language of love." Our greatest need is to be silent before this great God, to sit and listen at the feet of Jesus, to sit and listen in silence. Now, if you're looking for a resource about this kind of prayer, the best book I know is called Into the Silent Land by Martin Laird. I've read it probably 3 times now. It's excellent. Now, back to my comprehensive seminary exam. I mentioned there was one question I just could not answer. I fumbled around ums and ahs. Now, later on that day, after I had survived the firing squad, I finally sat down to pray. Now, for priests and religious, we're expected, part of our prayer has to consist of praying from this book called the Breviary, the Liturgy of the Hours. And in it is an extended reading from a spiritual author. And when I finally sat down to pray that day, I opened my book and I started reading this from this spiritual author. And I discovered there the answer to the question that I couldn't answer in my exam. The answer was just sitting there waiting for me in prayer. And the reality is that prayer, if I had prayed first, if I had prioritized prayer, it would have actually made me a more effective student. You see, prayer is never an escape from our responsibilities and expectations and obligations. It's actually the very thing we need to be more effective in what we're called to do with our lives. If we want to be the men and women God created us to be, the mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, children, co-workers, students, bosses, we need prayer. We need to prioritize prayer and first sit and listen at the feet of Jesus. And it was like the Lord was saying to me, Alex, you are busy, you are distracted and worried for many things. But there is need of only one thing. Choose the better part. And so I made a commitment that day that for the rest of my life, I would prioritize prayer. I would never go a day where I did not start my day silence before God. It's not just another thing on my checklist to do. It's the center from which I live into the whole rest of my life. Now, I'm definitely not perfect at this. There's lots of mistakes I make, and I'm often distracted, thinking about a million different things. Even Friday, for 15 minutes of my prayer time, I was Googling tropical surfing destinations. So I don't have this down pat, all right? But other times when I really just sit and listen at the feet of Jesus, things begin to happen. It's when I sit and listen at the feet of Jesus that I get in touch with the deepest desires of my heart, where I'm reminded of what's most important in life. It's where I begin to drink deeply of the well of the Spirit of God that lives in the depths of every believer. And it's where I begin to live from a place of inner stillness and peace into the chaotic world around me. And it's where I hear the answers to the great exam questions of life. And this isn't just for me, it's for every disciple. Now, if today you're distracted and worried by many things, perhaps Jesus is inviting you to make time to sit and listen. So, will you choose the better part?